Now I want to turn to our panel to get their perspectives on this carjacking crisis. We sought out a diverse group pulling from their expertise in education and mentoring. And joining me now is Horace Hall, a professor at DePaul University covering teacher education and critical ethnic studies. He also is the co-founder and co-director of the Real Youth Program. It's a mentoring program that also works with CPS, Chicago Public Schools. We also have Julie Nubler, a licensed clinical social worker and director of Metro Behavioral Health Services with Children's Home and Aid. She also works with mentoring programs. And Dave Williams. He is the regional vice president of youth advocate programs, which works closely with the community groups like Choose to Change and the Chicago Public Schools. So thank you all for joining me. We did ask local law enforcement leaders to join us, including CPD and the Cook County Sheriff's Office. Both of them declined our invitation. But in spite of that, we will continue to tackle this topic for a better understanding of why it's happening and what the possible solutions are to this complex issue. I want to start with some of the shocking revelations from the youngest carjacker we spoke with. He was David, at just 14 years old. I want you to take me back to that first time. What drew you to it?
The game, GTA.
Like a video game?
Mm-hmm. If you don't got a car now, you can just take the car from people.
What about seeing that video game made you think this is something that I could do?
It looked fun. I wanted to do it.
Julie, I want to start with you. From your perspective and your expertise, the idea that a child, 14 years old, a teenager, is influenced by something like a video game. What are your thoughts on that?
My initial reaction is that this is a much more complex issue than is being described as inspired by a video game. The young people that programs like Choose to Change and other mentoring programs and wraparound services provide services to are experiencing extreme levels of trauma. They are brought up in communities that have been disinvested in by cities, and there are systemic issues such as racism and other things that put pressure on these young people. Young people that come to our programs don't believe they're going to see past the age of 18. And when you can't conceive or dream of a future, it's really hard to extend empathy and understanding to others. And when violence and trauma has happened to you or someone that you care about, it becomes, and it happens in a chronic way, it becomes how you deal with the world.
With this 14-year-old and the 16-year-old girl that we spoke to, Nicole, they said that they actually saw the same behavior modeled in their family. They didn't have the structure, the environment, to make better decisions. And Horace, I saw you nodding there. What has been your perspective on that?
It is a process or a product of life imitating art, right? We can see that. And Julie alluded to a lot of the complex issues around delinquency. With some of the young folk that I mentor in the Real program, and they tell me that delinquency often starts by trying to fit in, right? Because of the type of environment that you live in, right? They go outside and it can be a war zone from sun up to sundown, right? They see robberies or they see shootings, muggings, even murder. With the loss of a loved one, they don't go through the process of grieving, right? There's no time to grieve, or you'll look weak as a result of it. And so there's a struggle to survive in their communities, but there's also a struggle to get out of it.
Dave, I want to turn to you with this next part. A part of the influence, particularly for this 14-year-old boy, was the fact that he knew that it'd be just that easy to get a gun off of Facebook. And I want to play a clip from you, an extended interview with this young boy. So when you commit this carjacking, did you have weapons?
Yes.
Okay. How do you get a hold of weapons like that?
Like people On Facebook and stuff, they'll sell guns.
So you were able to buy a weapon off Facebook?
Yes.
Is it from someone, is it a stranger or is it from someone you know?
A stranger.
And how does that work? Do you message back and forth? Is it in code?
Now we just, like, yeah, it's like a code.
But both of you all know what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. And then do you meet up and buy it from him?
Uh-huh.
And so is that how easy it is for you to get a gun?
Yeah.
Just buying it off Facebook?
Mm-hmm.
And do you find that a lot of kids your age do that?
Yes.
Have any of the kids that you work with talked about using Facebook to get guns, or even talking about just how simple it is for them to get weapons?
Accessibility in our community is readily, unfortunately, is available. And the majority of the weapons that I hear about don't necessarily come from social media, but they come through other ways, come from other states. Our neighboring state, they come out of Indiana. So that's where we hear about accessibility to weapons.
Horace, have you come across this? Had you heard about the issue of kids being able to simply buy the guns off Facebook?
It's access to them, but how and why, right? So why are they using these guns? And oftentimes what they tell me is that it's about protection, right? It could be retaliation in many respects, but a part of retaliation is protection.
I want to turn to remote learning. In 2020 and into early 2021, access to education was significantly impacted. Children were at home, they were doing remote learning, or we were hoping that they were doing remote learning, but many were not engaged. Many were not even logging in. And we did hear from CPS, Chicago Public Schools, that during that time, especially at the beginning of that pandemic, they were not keeping track of attendance. Both David and Nicole spoke to me about how, with all that time away from the school buildings, it gave them the opportunity to commit carjackings. Has the pandemic, the coronavirus, in any way influenced you when it comes to carjackings?
There's nothing else to do, so you will just find anything just to occupy yourself with something to do. I would sometimes go to school, sometimes I won't, if I'm feeling it or not. If I was doing the in-person school, that it would be less of me thinking to go carjack somebody. I like in-person school, so it's easier for me to be engaged. So with me doing remote learning, it's kind of boring because it's I'm not around my classmates. I can't conversate. I can't be in face-to-face having conversations with my teachers or anything like that. So it's what is there else to do?
How seriously do you think you took remote learning?
Not that serious.
Yeah. So is there anything about the pandemic that made it more likely that you were going to commit a carjacking? Did you feel like you had more time on your hands so you could do it?
Yes.
Were you just bored and looking for something to do?
Mm-hmm.
We pulled data from Chicago Public Schools, and it showed that there was at least a 10% drop in first day attendance. In 2020, heading into 21, attendance rate was 84%. If we look at the year prior to that, it was 94%. And then just this last year when we started, it was 91%. And we saw carjacking numbers skyrocket during this very time. So what are your thoughts on the ability to navigate remote learning and a pandemic for all of these kids who already have other environmental factors that may make it even more likely that they're going to pursue carjackings?
School is not just a place that young people go to learn. School is a place that families turn to for food, that they turn to for support. They turn to schools for access to resources and information. The schools in Chicago play a vital role in connecting families who are struggling with the things that they need.
Not only were schools closed, as Judy talked about, but vital youth programs were also shuttered, right? So you have young people in many instances not getting adequate supervision, both academically and socially. Now, I'm disinclined to say whether or not pandemic led more teens to engage in carjackings, but this pandemic has most certainly um, exposed the inequities in resources at the neighborhood level.
What are you seeing in terms of the financial commitment in Chicago to programs like Choose to Change, to mentoring programs? And do you think it's enough?
Of course, we could always use more resources, but I have to say on behalf of CPS, and I'm not speaking for them, but we partnered with them during the beginning of the pandemic. We went out, we were encouraged to go out, provide technology, additional support in terms of helping students to log on to their classes. Many of our staff went out, went shopping for families, provided food to help offset some of the challenges that come with the stresses, unemployment. We not only work with the young person, but we also go in and support the family.
The city and CPS have been very generous partners to Choose to Change. But one of the things that I think is there's not one solution to this problem, because not every young person has had the same set of experiences. What's one thing that is true for every young person that comes to our Choose to Change program is that they've all experienced some trauma. Some of them have experienced upwards of 7 different types of chronic trauma. And that has a really compound impact on their ability to use reasoning, to make good choices, to think about consequences, to understand the impact of their actions, and care beyond what's happening in the moment to them.
We have to, of course, think about the victims here who say, is the solution really mentoring? Is that enough? Or is that an easy way out for kids when they should have tougher consequences? Within the juvenile justice system, do you believe that there is a path to rehabilitation through that? Is that a part of this equation?
We really don't know how youth are doing after they've been through the judicial system. And to punctuate that, carjacking is considered a violent crime, once again. So the minors are precluded from programs such as diversion programs to divert them from being repeat offenders.
To your point, one of the things that about our program Choose to Change is that we partnered with the University of Chicago and we did a rigorous randomized control trial to measure our effectiveness. So we've been operating the program over 6 years. We've had some great outcomes in terms of violence reduction for the young people that we serve, 48% reduction in violent arrest, as well as over the first year, and then over the last 18 months to 2 years, it's reduced by 38%. What's important to us is to work with the young people that are most at risk in their communities, and to try to provide them support to avoid some of these sort of circumstances and victimizations that occur.
Research with the Crime and Education Lab, where they have taken specific neighborhoods where lots of gun violence is happening. And you see those communities and they overlay with available resources, banks, pharmacies, things that we, living in different, other neighborhoods of the city might take for granted, how easy it might be to get to your pharmacy to pick up your prescription. But in these communities, people are having to take 2 or 3 buses, sometimes traveling 45 minutes just to pick up a prescription or go to a grocery store to find fresh food for their family. And so these issues are not separate. They are a part of this problem.
To that point, Nicole, the 16-year-old, when I asked her, what kind of help do you think you need from others to stop you from doing this? At first, she was at a loss for words, really. She said, I don't know. She doesn't seem to see the help around her. Do you feel like you have the resources within your community?
To be honest, no.
No. What's missing?
Like, it's a lot of stuff that go on in these communities. Like, it's kids dying from like guns. Like, they fight.
And all that, you think, in the community, if that could change, it might make it easier for you to make better decisions?
Yeah.
some of the feedback that we've gotten is that at 14 years old, you know it's not okay to do this. So why should we feel sorry for you when you know, and many other people choose to take a different route, even when they're met with tough circumstances?
As a parent, who raised some 14 to 15, 16 years, they make bad choices. And that's the time when they're supposed to make bad choices. And what we're supposed to offer as parents, adults in the community, is protective factors from their poor choices. So all of us in the communities have to take some level of accountability when the village is not acting appropriately. And locking people up is not the solution.
Young folks in particular tend to be cavalier. They're not thinking about the consequences of their actions or the impact, right, of their choices.
I think it's really important to know the impact that trauma has on the brain. Our response to crisis happens in a part of our brain that is automatic. And when people of any age experience trauma over and over and over, our brain reroutes the path to a trauma response very quickly. And we don't necessarily access all of the parts of our brain. And adolescents aren't supposed to have a fully formed prefrontal cortex in the thinking part of our brain.
What message do you have for people who say, this is such an issue in our community, I'm afraid for my life, am I supposed to care about what happens to young carjackers?
The perception is that, okay, these young folks, if I live in Lincoln Park, these young folks are coming for me, right? A vast majority of these carjackings are in these young people's own communities. That's the first thing. The second thing, with respect to your special report, we need to hear the stories, the life stories of these young people. We're bombarded every day with images which can produce or create this obscure perception of young people, particularly Black and brown, as criminals. But their stories gives us more dimension and helps us to understand who they are, but also understand root causes that push them to engage in such behaviors.
Disinvestment in community is not working. Arresting and incarcerating people is not working. Targeting people because we have, implicit bias is not working. We, in terms of, all members of society, need to educate themselves, reflect on their role. We all have a role in what's happening, and we can choose to step up or step out. And I'm choosing to step up.
The conversation doesn't end here. This is a complex issue that we'll continue to cover right here on CBS News Chicago. Thanks for joining us. I'm Irika Sargent. We'll be right back.